My name is Adam Graves. I'm a professor of philosophy at MSU Denver, and this event is a collaboration between the Denver Project for Humanistic Inquiry, which is an initiative sponsored by MSU Denver in collaboration with History Colorado. And I just want to thank again Sean, the technician here, for helping us out tonight, as well as JJ Rutherford and everybody basically here at History Colorado for making this possible. Basically, if you're here tonight, you probably know about DeFi already, but if you don't, please do check us out online. You can put in Denver Project for Humanistic Inquiry into your Facebook search and you'll find us. I'm a shameless promoter of this project because I think it's awesome. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce my colleague James Reed in the philosophy department, who's going to introduce our distinguished speaker. Thank you.
Thanks, Adam. So, it is my, can you hear me?
Yeah.
How's that? Is that working?
Yeah.
Yes? Good. So it's my great pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Robert Pippin, whom I'd like to thank personally for agreeing to participate in tonight's event in the midst of an already crowded schedule of speaking engagements around the globe. We are very fortunate to have him with us this evening. Robert is the Evelyn Stephenson Neff Distinguished Service Professor of Social Thought and Philosophy at the University of Chicago, where he's taught for more than 20 years. He is a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and the American Philosophical Society, and the recipient of a prestigious Andrew Mellon Foundation's Distinguished Achievement Award in the Humanities. To say something truly informative about Robert's philosophical interests, achievement, and influence would require a lecture in its own right, which I will spare you. Robert is perhaps best known as a philosophical historian of post-Kantian German philosophy, with special interests in the complex legacy of Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, whom some of you might recognize as a major influence on the young Karl Marx. To say that his work ranges widely is something of an understatement. It embraces nearly every significant German philosopher from Kant to the present, and a few minor figures too, and grapples with issues across the philosophical spectrum, including, importantly, philosophy's relation to literature, poetry, painting, and film, and the nature, scope, and philosophical problems of modern life and society. Robert has that rare ability to get oriented in an author's work with enviable ease and swiftness, and then to say something about it with greater depth, clarity, and richness than most scholars who specialize exclusively in it. His book on the novels of Henry James and modern moral life, which came as a surprise to many of us when it appeared in the year 2000, is a case in point and remains one of the best contributions to the philosophy of literature to have come out within the last 50 years. He is the author or editor of more than 20 books, including recently 2 important volumes on Hegel's theories of agency and desire, which bear a close connection to tonight's themes. The first great book on Friedrich Nietzsche's conceptions of philosophy and moral psychology, 2 volumes dedicated to film and philosophy, on Hollywood westerns and American film noir, respectively, and most recently a collection of essays on the reception of German philosophy in the work of several prominent contemporary thinkers, which includes valuable reflections on what it means to do work in and on the history of philosophy itself. His talk today bears the title, Film as Philosophy, Agency and Fate in Out of the Past. Please join me in welcoming Robert Pippin.
Thank you very much, James. Thank you all for coming. I'm extremely pleased to be here, mostly because this thing fell off. Mostly because I'm very happy to talk to people about the philosophical dimensions of Hollywood cinema. Hollywood cinema, the classical period from the 1930s to roughly around the middle of the 1950s or so, after the film studios lost their monopoly on theaters, is a contested issue in film theory, something that itself exists as an academic discipline only since the 1970s, because it was usually thought that film made by Hollywood studios as commercial enterprises was not worthy of serious theoretical reflection. That began to change in the 1980s and 1990s, and through the work of critics in France, mostly. It's a very similar situation to American jazz. The intellectual respectability of film through the work of people like André Bazin and the Cahiers du Cinéma people in the 60s and 70s, the status of Hollywood film started to rise until finally when Orson Welles, whose Citizen Kane is regularly voted until recently the greatest movie ever made, when asked, who are your favorite American directors? Responded John Ford, John Ford, John Ford. So things have changed a great deal. It's still somewhat controversial to suggest that a so-called B movie, movies that the Hollywood cinema enterprise made for mandatory exclusion in the double bills they made their own theaters by, were vehicles of serious reflective thought. That's part of what I hope to convince you of, at least partly tonight, that these so-called realist narratives, continuity editing, and real beginnings and real endings are serious works of art. In my own work, I've been interested in two of the many Hollywood genres. Hollywood, as you know, makes films in types. Once some commercial success happens, they're repeated. They're not formula films, they're very different, but they are in genres. Westerns, film noirs, musicals, melodramas, war movies, screwball comedies, and so forth. So the two I've been interested in are westerns and film noir, and I'd like to start by saying a little bit about why I'm interested in both of those. But that will require, to some extent, a step back into a major issue in political philosophy. The major issue in modern political philosophy is the legitimacy of the state. That is, how we answer the question, first posed in this rather brutal form by Max Weber, what distinguishes the exercise of coercive violence by one group of people for their own interests against another group of people from the exercise of coercive violence by the state against all other groups of people. For radical political thinkers like Marx and like Nietzsche, the answer is there is no difference. That's all the state is. But for thinkers in the modern period who think there is an answer to the question, one way of beginning to answer the question is to imagine the situation of pre-law, pre-civil society, human beings as we know them, and then to try to imagine why it would be unavoidable or necessary to give up the right to decide all issues in your own case, to give up the authority to decide matters of public interest to one organization with a monopoly on the use of coercive violence, otherwise known as the police, against everybody else. And in modern political philosophy, as those of you who've studied it know, this so-called state of nature contractualist tradition, where it would be unavoidably rational on pain of self-destruction not to do this, inspired philosophers like Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau, Kant, and in our own time, very successful and influential political philosophers like John Rawls. But there's another way of imagining this situation and thinking about this, and that is the work of Hollywood Westerns. All the great Hollywood Westerns are about exactly this problem. They're all about the West, the frontier, without yet the arrival of official, instituted, respected, legitimate law in situations of complete lawlessness. And most of the great Westerns are about how we are supposed to think about how it's possible for there to be a transition between such lawlessness and the rule of law. How, especially in a context where the so-called pre-modern or heroic virtues, like martial success at violence, honor, individuality, self-sufficiency, and so forth, could affect a transition to a rule where the domestic or bourgeois virtues of patience, stability, law-abidingness, faithfulness, familial virtues could be instituted. I find them a profound reflection on that theme, the equal of the great philosophical tradition. And that's what I tried to argue in one book. Red River, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, High Noon, Shane, 310 to Yuma, The Big Country, the list goes on and on. That's essentially what they're about, and it's particularly important in an American context. America is an unusual country. We do not have a long, centuries-long tradition of a common people occupying the same space of the territory. We are an invented country. And the experiment was to see if nothing other than the common allegiance to a set of constitutional principles could constitute a country successfully. And unfortunately, as we all know as Americans, the experiment failed. The United States fell apart into a brutal, fratricidal civil war, probably more brutal than any civil war in human history. Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people died, and the legacy is still with us. The Westerns I'm interested in are about the second founding, the attempt in the West to reestablish the United States in situations of great, dire, cataclysmic-like violence in the wars against the Native American peoples of the West and among each other. So this issue of whether a successful second founding can be possible is of particular importance in the United States. Those of you who've seen the Western High Noon with the famous dramatic last scene in which Gary Cooper has asked the town for support in trying to help him fend off the murderous arrival of the 3 outlaws he sent to jail, and they refuse. Remember that the last scene involves Gary Cooper taking off the badge, the representation of the sanctity of the rule of law, which he's found to be hollow and false, and throwing it into the dirt. So Westerns are often, I think, in popular imagination considered simplistic morality tales in which good guys fight bad guys and the good guys are ruled. It's completely false. The great Westerns actually problematize the question of the legitimacy of law far more than most other imaginative projects by artists. Another way of thinking about this issue, though, is different and much less political. It's about what life is like when the rule of law begins to fail. And we're not talking about the pre-law, pre-civil society situation, but the post-law, post-civil society situation, when a rampant cynicism about the honesty and integrity as well as the sheer competence of the law begins to take over. And that's the world of film noir, which also raises questions about the viability of legal order, but in a much more sort of existential and very often psychological way as Westerns. And Out of the Past is like this. You'll notice that those of you who were here and just saw the movie, and nobody really worries very much about the police. It's not an issue in Out of the Past. They're irrelevant. Wit, the gambler, is so successful that it never even occurs to him, except with the last little IRS plot, that he might get caught. But there's no fear of the police. There's no agent of the police in the movie, and that's quite typical of noirs. And when there are agents of the law, they're corrupt or incompetent, often with stupefying stupidity, arresting the wrong person, involving them, following the wrong lead. So, for me, the film noir genre represents something like a bookend at the other end of the American imagination, and it's dealing with the question of what kind of country are we and what our relationship to the legal structure of the country is. Film noir represents a kind of dark moment. Very odd that it occurs at the historical period it did. It started in the early 1940s, probably around 1941 with the Maltese Falcon. But most of the great noirs were made after 1945 until about 1954. And the Americans had just won the war. They just executed a great act of collective will and saved the world from fascism. But it was just at this period that many directors, many European directors especially, were making films about the impotence of human will in the face of fate. And visually, cinematically, the difference is quite striking. The framework for Westerns is open, outside, horizontal, mostly in the natural world, daylit. Whereas in noirs, the framing conventions, the cinematic visual intelligibility of the movies is not horizontal, but vertical, inside, stairs, elevators, bars, small narrow rooms, not outside, inside, in urban interiors, closed-in rooms, tight shops, shifting camera locations, not like Westerns, which often have a stationary camera, suggesting an objective, epic narration of the event, but a shifting set of camera locations and shifting lighting, shadowy, not clear, ambiguous. In the Western, the hero operates on a kind of ancient warrior code. Public honor is still quite important. The ideals of self-sufficiency and self-reliance are treated non-ironically and admiringly. Noirs are famously populated by people like Robin Mitchum, who you just saw. Anti-heroes, whose virtues are often a kind of craftiness, even cunning, skill, and a kind of ruthlessness. And the narratives are saturated in irony. In Westerns, guns are worn openly as a mark of one's readiness to defend oneself. In noirs, they're hidden. The language of the two genres is quite different. As you know, Western heroes are laconic, quiet, people of few words. Noir heroes are wisecracking agents of comedy. They're always making ironic, wisecracking remarks. The Western hero is alone. Typically, and perhaps stereotypically, as you all realize, the Western hero's greatest usual romantic act is to reject a relationship with a woman, get on his horse, and ride out of town, as at the end of My Darling Clementine, John Ford's great classic with Henry Fonda. Whereas in noirs, the romantic relationships are often deadly important, and obsessive. I don't think it would be fair to call them romantic love. What happens between Jeff and Kathy is something important, but it doesn't seem to be romantic love in any sense. There's a kind of obsessional attachment, almost an erotic attachment, at least on the part of Jeff. The Westerns are portrayed against a background where momentous historical possibility can be seized, and people can actually affect real historical change. Civilizations are founded. The rule of law is instituted. And the progress of history is just that, progress. Meliorates, ever better. Whereas in noirs, the community is dissolving. There doesn't seem to be any real space of possibility for action left. Everything seems already determined. Destiny in noirs is a matter that can't be fought, combated, confronted. You're just trapped, as in, I just saw a perfect example of it. Whatever Jeff tries to do, he's back with Kathy. No matter what he tries to do, he's back with Kathy. He can't affect his own future, try as he might. There's a wonderful moment, those of you who've seen one of the very best film noirs by Orson Welles about Vienna, the Third Man. You may remember a scene where Joseph Cotten plays the typical American in the scene, comes to Vienna to look for his old friend Harry Lime. Joseph Cotten plays an author of novels. What kind of novels? Westerns. And at one point he gives a lecture to a community of readers in Vienna. And we're, I think, supposed to understand that the virtues he celebrates in the Western novels, fairness, honesty, personal loyalty, dedication, or so forth, in the world of post-war Vienna, with the sort of murderous Harry Lime in the background, are really treated more like children's stories, naive in their innocence about the world, something Joseph Cotten has to learn in the movie. So that's why I'm interested in both noirs and American Westerns, because they tell us something about the American imaginary, that is to say, how we imagine ourselves to be as Americans, that somehow philosophy in its traditional professional form doesn't have quite enough access to, given that what we're really interested in as professional philosophers are arguments about whether the state's use of coercion is legitimate. But political life is considerably more complicated than that. And no one really was willing to die for their country because they thought the arguments justifying its constitutional principles were superior to the arguments of the enemy. And one of our ways of access to that is through these great works of imagination, Hollywood Westerns. All right, let me start just by talking for a few moments about the history of the genre film noir. After a long wartime period during which American movies could not be shown in Paris, that is 1939 to 1945, French critics were astonished at what they saw when the films all suddenly returned in 1945 and they could see movies made during this period. They especially expressed amazement at what had happened to the American gangster film, or crime melodrama, or private eye thriller. And some argued that the movies being produced were now qualitatively different, as if a new genre altogether, much darker and stranger than those previously made. In 1946, the journalist Nino Frank compared the films to the série noire novels, the Black Series novels of French crime thrillers, and coined the term film noir, black film. Eventually, two writers, Bord and Chomison, published a very influential book in 1955, and the convention was firmly established. The Americans had been making film noir, even though all during the classic period of the 1940s, no one had any idea that they were making film noir. There were a lot of stylistic conventions said to be common to the new genre: grim urban settings, often very cramped interiors, predominantly nighttime scenes and low-key lighting. Low-key means there are three usual big lamps lighting a scene, and in film noir they take away one of them. And you get a much different look because it's not lit the same way. That's called low-key lighting. And unusual camera angles. But there were important, you can see some of the effect in this unbelievable still from out of the past. Nothing but shadows. But there were important thematic elements in common, and two were quite important. First, noirs were almost always about crime, usually murder, often cold-blooded, well-thought-out murder. Even more surprisingly, the larger social context for such deeds, the historical American world in which they took place, was often portrayed as just as bleak, amoral, and ugly as the individual deeds and the characters themselves. The police and politicians were corrupt, or if not corrupt, then incompetent. The public was an anesthetized object of easy manipulation, or an easily aroused mob. The so-called American dream was treated with bitter irony, because in reality we are shown over and over, wealth and power were all that mattered. The noir representation of bourgeois domestic life, the peaceful, secure, commercial, and domestic activity many heroes were so desperately trying to establish in Hollywood Westerns, was so stultifying and banal that even crime began to look attractive to those trapped in it. The most powerful and effective passions seemed to be greed, revenge, lust, and craved fear. The state of modern marriage seemed absolutely horrific. Either some sort of stupefied self-satisfaction or a seething, barely controlled state of mutual loathing, as in Double Indemnity. Various putative heroes seemed dangerously close in type and attitude to the villains they pursued. Instances of traditional romantic love were very rare, as opposed to obsessive and often submissive attachments, raging possessiveness, and crassly manipulated sexual desire. Characters who had been righteous, stable, and paragons of responsibility all their adult lives were as seamlessly and quite believably transformed in a few seconds into reckless, dangerous, and even murderous types, all suggesting that anyone, any of us, in the right or wrong circumstances, was capable of almost anything, and that one's own sincere avowals of their basic principles could be ludicrously self-deceived. But this last theme, that a virtuous character can be as much a matter of moral luck, of having avoided by mere chance the particular temptation that would reveal the fragility of one's so-called principles, this possibility was a scene, a setting, a context as much as an individual problem, is also connected with an even larger philosophical issue: how we explain what people do as opposed to what simply happens to them. Here the issue is quite abstract and complicated, but it has a very simple basis. We all tend to think that there's a difference between what happens to us and what we do. When you get sick, something happens to you. When you fake an illness and call into work to get out of going in, that's something you do. And we think the latter is based on a set of conditions that philosophers have been endlessly investigating, but that are quite commonsensical to us. For something to be something you do, you have to have an alternative choice of possibilities. There has to be a set of alternatives in front of you. You have to be able to deliberate about which alternative should you take. Then you form an intention about what you seek to do. The intention leads to an active resolution that begins to produce the bodily movement that counts as the action you're undertaking, all of which makes it possible for you, in the distinctive characteristic of actions, when asked why you're doing what you're doing, to answer. Simple as that. That's the standard account of human agency that's come down to us from Aristotle, intensified a great deal by Christian notions of interiority and inner reflection, by notions of sin and so forth. But we're all, I think, are basically familiar with that commonsensical view of how we distinguish what happens to you from what you do. In this movie, you've seen Kathy appealing to this distinction all the time when she says, I couldn't help it, Jeff. I couldn't help it. It made me do it. It wasn't what I did. I had no choice. In this context, there's something one could say right away very generally about the characters, the setting, and the plot developments in film noir. Almost nobody significant in noirs behaves in a way that fits such a reflective model of action and agency. For one thing, it's clear that in some cases, no one of the principals in the movie has any clear idea why they're doing what they're doing at all. Jeff certainly has no idea of what's happening with Kathy. They often think they do, but there's evidence in this film that what they might manage to avow about their motives bears little relation to what they actually do. Or, in other cases, characters know, this is very common, know that what they are undertaking is profoundly ill-advised, and they can admit to themselves and others that there are no good reasons to do what they're doing. No answer to the why question. And many very good reasons not to act as they propose, yet they act that way anyway. Or these characters express themselves, sometimes sincerely, and sometimes self-deceptively, in ways that are difficult to fit into our conventional common sense model. They seem to say that the question of what they have reason to do, why they are doing what they're doing, has become irrelevant to what will happen. That they are fated or determined by some situation, by some social necessity, or by their own past, by who they are, or even by some obsessive love, to such an extent that any reflectively established relation to their own deeds is simply beside the point. Here's a list of titles of some of the most important noirs in the 1940s. Caught, possessed, tension, conflict, framed, detour, pitfall, edge of doom, one-way street, the reckless moment, the setup, brute force, desperate, the big sleep, where the sidewalk ends, odds against tomorrow, undercurrent, underworld, roadblock, the steel trap, DOA. With remarkable frequency, the characters, appeal explicitly to the ancient idea of fate, as when the main character in Edgar Ulmer's brilliant classic Detour says simply, fate or some mysterious force can put the finger on you for good or ill with no reason at all. Characters deliberating and thinking they are initiating various deeds come to look like pathetic figures frantically pulling various wires and pushing various buttons, not connected to some moving machine they're riding on a course completely indifferent to anything such characters pretend to be able to do. This is strange, because in the modern world, we would normally assume that this concept of fate or destiny is relevant only on the assumption of certain religious views. as is especially clear in the context of ancient Greek epics and tragedy. The gods will determine outcomes in the end, no matter what human beings plan, intend, or do. In that context, the expectation that we will be able to determine the future, not the gods, is hubristic and naive at the same time. Or is relevant for aristocratic societies with fixed social classes and hierarchy. We may act as if we have the capacity to act contrary to what such hierarchies prescribe, allow, or proscribe, but that too is an illusion and is dangerous. And of course, as you all remember, the classic narratives here are romantic. A boy and a girl from different classes fall in love and try to marry and have a life. But such affairs, we say easily, are doomed from the start. Fated to fail. Doomed because possible outcomes are already fixed by social structure, prohibitions, allowances, incentives, and punishments that no individual will can affect. Now, in a country, our country, whose intellectual lights include people like Locke and Jefferson, where the basic economic institutions and the entire legal system depend on notions of individual entitlement based on self-made achievements, what could it mean that so many films were made so easily characterizable as fatalistic? I think psychologically we have some sense of what this might mean, but we tend to think of it psychoanalytically or in terms of the unconscious as a kind of fate. We all know people to whom we want to say, you're always going with the same kind of man. A catastrophe for you. You know this. Yes, I know this. And yet you go back and find the same kind of person all over again. Yes, I know this. It's terrible. But I can't do anything about it. That's a notion of fate. No matter what you do to struggle against your fate, you end up with the same person. Jeff and Kathy. Bernard Williams once argued in a book that there is a difference between what we actually think about some issue, collectively and at a time, and what we think we think. And our committed responsiveness to literature and film can make that difference clear. What I'm suggesting is that we do not need to demonstrate somehow the invasion of an alien meaning of ancient assumptions to make such a point. The continuing hold of the notion of fate, if not religious, and its modern versions in psychological, social, and existential fate, what you can't fight against, if not religious, is nevertheless powerfully on view in these films. Film noirs, I want to argue, provide even more compelling evidence about the differences between what we think about individual causal agency, self-knowledge, moral responsibility, and our reflective access to ourselves, and what we are actually thinking or afraid to acknowledge we actually think, and so respond to, are moved by, find credible, and so forth, these films. This will raise some philosophical questions about what we ought to think about the issues themselves. Now, it would be an easy solution to all of this to argue that sometimes people are so overwhelmed by passion or need or anger or despair that they cease to be agents at all. Something emotional happens to them, as powerful as the effect of a drug or a brain trauma, and they are no longer running the show in any effective sense. But this would be far too facile a way to describe what happens to noir anti-heroes. None of them can be said to temporarily lose their capacity to act as if agency has a kind of on or off switch. They do act, often long-term, with a good deal of planning and forethought, even though what they do does not seem explicable on the reflective model, on the model of what they would say they want to do. In that respect, the ur-noir some of you have seen might be Billy Wilder's great film, Double Indemnity, where the plot is driven by an attempt to make what is intentional, the murder of her husband, look accidental, a mere happening, not something done. All the while also showing that much of the putatively intentional, their planning and executing, is based on a diluted sense of how the accidental might be intentionally mastered, and where the job of the investigator in that movie, Keyes, the Edward Robertson character, is almost a kind of metaphysical job, to strictly hold the distinction fast despite any doubts, and to insist that there is a truth about the relation between intention and responsibility instead of fate and chance. As we'll see, there are several characters in film noir who have some stake in being able to claim that what they caused to happen was not up to them, was really accidental, couldn't be helped. Like the movie, there's a kind of double indemnity if you succeed in making this convincing. You get to do and deny that you did it. But the intentional accidental or the intentional coerced dualisms are, we are shown, far less stable than our characters would like, and these noir characters have to find some way to try to live with the facts. Now, this situation has become especially interesting in the last 150 years or so, under the influences first of the so-called philosophers known as the masters of suspicion, Marx, Nietzsche, and Freud. And in our own way, under the influence of everything from structuralism and various so-called anti-humanisms and postmodernisms to evolutionary biology and the neurosciences. Many seem to have concluded that in an ever-expanding range of cases, it only seems to us that we are running the show as agents, actually leading our lives. Our deluded figures on top of the destiny machine actually accurately picture the human condition itself, thinking they're pulling switches and pressing buttons that are causing the machine to go in some direction where it's actually on its own impetus. It is not that any of these anti-subjectivist, anti-agent people have given us a remotely plausible picture of what it would be like, what it would feel like, to live a life under the assumptions that their various conceptions of necessity hold to be true. But I want to say that many of the film noir directors present a pattern of what remain actions, subjects doing things, but in a way that prevents us from any temptations to think that they have simply had to become spectators of their own activities, that they're not really acting, and in a way that does not fit and in effect challenges the commonsensical model we summarized before. They show us what it literally feels like to live in a world where the experience of our own agency has begun to degrade and almost disappear. Of course, this is a book-length question in itself. Why look at films to pursue such questions? What is unique to filmic or visual as opposed to other sorts of representations? What's the difference between action explanation in real life and understanding characters in film? What could it mean to suggest that the ways in which we hold each other to account as agents can be said to change or degrade? How could there be some indeterminate category between doing something, acting, and something happening? Well, the best I can do is to hope to address these weighty questions indirectly in the course of the details of looking at one film. Jacques Tourneur's masterpiece, his 1947 Out of the Past, is packed with what had, by that point of view, become elements deeply characteristic of the noir archetypal framework. A man lives under a new name, trying not just to hide, but sincerely to become a new person. The entire film is about whether one can ever get out of the past and into a new future. Deeply American theme. We all believe that's possible. That's the American idea. You get, 150 chances, not just one, to remake yourself. And this is quintessentially what Jeff is trying to do, to become another person, to get out of the past. There is a voiceover flashback narration in the film, and nothing is more typical of film noir than this device. There are various complex double and double crosses. If you couldn't follow the last third of the movie, don't worry, nobody can follow the first third of the movie the first time you see it, although it's not as bad as The Big Sleep. When they were making the Big Sleep, Howard Hawks called Raymond Chandler and asked him, why did the chauffeur die and who killed him? And Raymond Chandler said, I have no idea. This is on. Much of the action is framed as a tension or even a choice between a good woman in a normal, domestic, near rural setting and a bad woman, a creature of the city, the night, perhaps the modern woman of the future. Kathy appears as if materialized out of light and seems real only in the shadows, and certainly a femme fatale. Kathy is responsible for the deaths of 5 men in the movie. The major male lead, Robert Mitchum, seems both tough and competent, and at the same time, oddly passive, entrapped again and again by the spider. And the movie ends with an ambiguous final choice by him that seems both liberating and suicidal. I know you've just seen the film. I think we need a quick plot summary to get ourselves oriented before we can understand what these elements have to do with the agency scene. I'll show some clips too. A well-dressed man in a convertible drives into a gas station in a very small town and announces that he's looking for the owner, Jeff Bailey, who it turns out is off fishing on his lunch hour with the good girl character, the blonde and wholesome Anne, played by Virginia Houston. We learned quickly that Anne had been the longtime sweetheart of a local game warden, very pompous character named Jim, Richard Webb, and that Jeff's arrival has created a great deal of unease about the stranger in their midst. But we learned this, if you remember the beginning, and I'll show you a bit of it, that goes out of its way to emphasize unusually abstract relations among seeing, hearing, and the truth. The boy tending the gas station is a deaf mute, and we learn quickly that Jeff alone in the town can understand sign language, can hear by seeing, in other words. Here is the opening scene, and note how quickly the kid comes to understand by merely seeing that Joe, the gangster, is dangerous, and so is on his guard right away. All it takes is the stranger's reaction to a police car passing by and the endlessly revealing, arrogant way he tries to get the kid's attention to demand information that tells us in a kind of visual, immediate sense that only movies can do all we need to know about Joe.
Can you read lips? Where is Bailey? Coming back today? Come on.
I edited this, but I cut off a few seconds.
One thing sure, that Bailey don't miss nothing.
Neither do you.
She's your girl, and he ain't my man, so it's no skin off my nose. I just see what I see.
You sure you don't see what you hear?
Nothing can happen in this town that I don't hear about it across this counter. I'm just saying what I see.
We'll come back to that issue. It's really crucial to the voiceover narration thing, because we see what we're also hearing from Jeff. We learn quickly that a gangster and gambler, with Sterling, Kirk Douglas in his first movie role, who has employed Jeff before, has sent Joe because he wants Jeff to come visit him, and it's a request that Jeff apparently cannot refuse. It's immediately clear that Jeff had been in effect hiding out in the small town of Bridgeport, and by mere chance, a force that will play a great role in all the major events, has been discovered. On the way to Witt's mansion near Lake Tahoe, Jeff, who has changed clothes, and thereby also rather abruptly, in one step, changed from peaceable rural gas station operator to private eye, complete with trench coat and fedora, decides to tell Anne, who's riding along with him to Whit's place, about his past, something he had clearly hoped was over and that he could hide from. The flashback voiceover narration of the film begins. So it raises the question right away that, I don't know if you remember, but the transformation is quite striking, almost comic. 1 minute he's a gas station attendant, and then in the next scene, you see him trench coat, fedora, the classic 1940s private eye, and you wonder which one, right away, which one is the real Jeff. Something he wonders as well. So we hear the details from the voiceover as they're driving in the car. Jeff and his partner in a New York detective agency had been hired 3 years ago by Whit to find one Kathy Moffat, Jane Greer, in a spectacular performance. His girlfriend, who shot him 4 times, and he says stole $40,000 from him. Jeff tracks her down to Acapulco, falls for her, and thinks that she falls for him. And here's Kathy's entrance, which is a classic noir entrance. I'll show you some more.
And then I saw her coming out of the sun. And I knew why Whit didn't care about that 40 grand.
Do you believe it, please?
Sí, señorita.
Señorita, señor, may I speak some words? You will be seated, señor, eh? Yes?
With pleasure, senor.
Actually, film fatale entrances like this are archetypal moments in film noir. They can suggest the extreme view of a kind of magical spell or mysterious erotic power that can render the male forever afterwards a mere dupe, a passive victim of such power, much like a cartoon character sleepwalking behind some spider web. More prosaically, these entrances just demonstrate how utterly a life can be altered in a single moment. Even doing nothing about what one powerfully feels can be life-altering, because doing nothing now becomes an action in itself, a memory that haunts one and shadows everything that one does. At the risk of spending a little too much time, I can't resist showing you a montage of femme fatale entrances, so you can get a sense of how archetypal this moment is in noir. The first one is Lana Turner and John Garfield. The Postman only rings twice, from 1946.
Drop this?
She gives him a look at the end of the scene that sums up the sense of power that she Ossessione, this is the Italian version by Visconti. It can work both ways, man and woman. Not sure.
Si mangia qui.
Ti domando se si mangia qui.
Oh, dear.
How soon do you expect it?
Double Indemnity,
Yes.
Billy Wilder, 1944.
What is it, Nellie? Who is it?
It's for Mr. Dickerson.
I'm Mrs. Stevenson. What is it?
How do you do, Mr. Dietrichson? I'm Walter Nett, Pacific All Risk.
Pacific Gold what?
The Pacific All Risk Insurance Company. It's about some renewals on the automobiles. I've been trying to contact your husband for the past 2 weeks, but he's never in his office.
Is there anything I can do?
The insurance ran out on the 15th. I'd hate to think of you having a smashed fender or something while you're not fully covered.
Perhaps I know what you mean, Mr. Knapp. I've just been taking a sunbath.
No pigeons around, I hope. Now, about those policies, Mr. Dietrichson, I hate to take up your time.
Well, that's all right. If you wait till I put something on, I'll be right down. Nettie, show Mr. Neff into the living room.
When I start out to make a fool of myself,
Ladies from Shanghai,
there's very little can stop me.
Rita Hayward.
If I'd known where it would end, I'd have never let anything start. If I had been in my right mind, that is. But once I'd seen her, I was not in my right mind for quite some time.
And just to show you how far this extends, 1981. Actually, I want to show you this one. There's a flaw on the right-hand side. So I just can't resist showing it to you because it's one of the great openings of all time. It's the Vertigo. First time you see Kim Novak. And everything about the film is a kind of homage to what film can do. What cinematic color, camera placement, movement, and music can do. But no music until one moment that everything begins to happen. And then this dolly shot as it tracks Alan around. Color, unbelievable. I wish I had a better ring. And then the pathos of what he feels in the music. Falls in love with his back. It's possible. Vertigo is now regularly voted the greatest film ever made. By the way, if you haven't seen it, we'll put that on your to-do list. Jeff and Kathy sneak back together after they fall in love and escape from Mexico. They sneak back together to San Francisco where they hide out, eventually and foolishly, daring to go to some more public places and are accidentally, chance again, discovered by Jeff's former partner, Jack Fisher. He tracks them down to their cabin in the mountains, demands the $40,000 he believes Kathy has stolen. It's clear that Jeff doesn't believe she stole it, because that's what she told him. Or, as he says in a famous line in the movie, that became the title of his official biography, when she said, "Jeff, I didn't steal the money." And he said, "Baby, I don't care." Here's what happens. I'll show a good deal of the scene. You'll have to adjust for the time frame. The fight scene is much different than you're used to, and the language. But you can see here how unusually shot it is. The camera angles, the lighting are so typical of Noir that it'd be nice to see the whole thing. Deep shadow, long, low camera angle, tight shots, and then very close interiors.
Don't I get introduced? I don't blame you, Jeff. Maybe I'd light my head up just like you did. Your picture don't do you justice, baby.
Why don't you break his head, Jeff?
Cute. Whit should have got her back. What I understand, they deserve each other.
You working for him now?
Who else would he get to find my partner?
All right, Fisher, what's the pitch?
You and I had a little deal, Jeff. 10 grand in expenses. 50-50. Remember? You used to have a good memory. Whatever happened to him?
I didn't collect.
Not the 10 grand.
I can give you a tip. You tell Whit where we are. He might slip you a sore buck.
Jeff, he isn't going to tell Whit anything.
Sure not. You just come up with that 40 grand and we're all pals again. I might even cut you in for a piece of it.
There isn't any 40 grand.
Of course Whit's broad-minded. He don't care about a few slugs in the stomach or the 40 grand the dame went off with. Or even Jeff pretending he fell down on the job. But you and Jeff ganging up together, he might not like that.
Tell him, Kathy.
Sure, I shot him. I'm not sorry about that. But I didn't take his money.
Beat it.
Look at all the angles. You know Whit and you know how far he can reach. So just pay me off and I'm quiet. But use cash. Don't try to pay me off with pitch handed to you with this cheap piece of baggage.
Yes, I did. You wouldn't have killed him. You would have beaten him up and thrown him out.
You didn't have to do it.
You wouldn't have killed him. You'd have been against us. Gone to Whit.
Yes, I know. You know, it's- I got tired of students doing my show this film laughing during the phony fight scene, so I cut it out. So we exit the flashback and we return to the present with Jeff and Anne in the car about to come to Whit's mansion. So he says goodbye and he enters the mansion and he's shocked to discover that after all of this, 3 years later, there's Kathy at the mansion. She's returned to Whit. Here's a scene where she tries to explain herself and Jeff responds. It is in a way an unusually harsh response because, as is typical of noir irony, Jeff is just as guilty of what she is saying about herself. He too can't help being back in Whit's control. Not to mention later, Kathy's control. Kathy is in this scene lying about virtually everything. What is interesting is that Jeff is in essence lying too to himself about this break with Kathy. He's just as trapped by Whit as she is.
Jeff, I had to come back. What else could I do?
You can never help anything, can you? You're like a leaf that the wind blows from one gutter to another. You can't help anything you do, even murder.
You can't say it was that.
I can say one thing, I buried him. What did you tell him?
Well,
About us? But you couldn't help it, could you, Ken?
he knew it, Jeff. He looked right into me and he knew it.
How much?
What, Jeff?
I mean about Fisher. Did he look into you for that, too?
No, I didn't tell that.
Don't lie to me.
I didn't. I wouldn't tell him that. I wouldn't tell anyone that. I swear it, Jeff. Believe me.
Sure, I believe it.
I didn't know what to do. I was always afraid of him and afraid of what I'd done. I couldn't live that way anymore. I couldn't stand it. Jeff, I've missed you. I've wondered about you. Prayed you'd understand. Can you understand?
You prayed, Kathy?
Can't you even feel sorry for me?
I'm not going to try.
Jeff.
But just get out, will you? I have to sleep in this room.
Pretty harsh. Especially since he's in the same fix. Whit proposes one more job to Jeff, something to clear the books, freedom from the debt he owes Whit for having double-crossed him. Okay, here's the last third of the part. Pay attention. Whit's taxman in San Francisco, Leonard Eels, who has helped him cheat the IRS, is now blackmailing Whit. And Whit has concocted a plan in cahoots with Eels' secretary, Maida Carson, Ron Fleming, for Jeff to sneak into Eels' office and steal the incriminating documents. We learn later that this is all a frame-up, that the real plan is to murder Eels and pin it on Jeff, both getting the documents back and getting revenge on Jeff for double-crossing Whit. In a very complex set of plot developments, Jeff discovers the frame-up and foils it. Here is a scene with Kathy where he figures it all out. But notice again, first, how bitter is his condemnation of Kathy for changing sides so quickly. And secondly, I think how quickly Jeff himself changes sides at the end of the scene. The lighting and staging of this scene are also quite beautiful, very lush, black and white. And Kathy expresses at the end the naive ideal that undergirds the whole movie, starting over, escaping the past as if nothing had happened. This is a crucial scene in the movie for how you evaluate what's happening to Jeff. Everything will come to a head at the very last part where they're embracing. And she says, "You must have hated me?" And he says, "Yes." And she says, "But you don't hate me now?" And he says, "No." And then the body language, in a way that again only film can do, creates the ambiguity about the kiss. It looks like his posture of resistance melts, and that the kiss is genuine. Later, that will be crucial to figuring out how well he knows his own mind. So, I don't claim to have a definitive view on this. You can make up your own mind about the very last scene in this clip.
Is there a slip up, Dave? Did you by any chance send your friend up there to find Eels dead?
No, Jeff.
Tell me. Tell me.
Don't, Jeff.
Tell me what?
I don't want to die.
Neither do I, maybe, but if I have to, I'll die last. Something slipped up, didn't it? They told you they were going to knock him off, and they haven't done it, have they? They haven't because I tipped him off. He blew.
He's all right?
Didn't you want him to be?
Yes. Yes, because if he dies, they'll say you did it.
Oh, you're wonderful, Kathy. You're magnificent. You can change sides so smooth.
Don't, Jeff. You're hurting me.
I'm almost getting it. Very pretty. Vic wants to get Eels out of the picture. He wants to square an old account with me. Two birds together. So I come to town with an address. A redhead takes me up to visit the chump who has to go. I have a drink, leave my prints around. I leave and somebody gets it. Eels died. The tax papers, they were in the briefcase that Mita took Monday. Papers go back to Whit. I'm the fall guy. There's only one thing missing. The plant. What was there to give me a motive? I wouldn't kill a guy for a martini. Tell me, Ken.
They made me sign it.
Sign what?
An affidavit.
Go on.
I couldn't help it, Jeff. They made me sign it. I swear I couldn't help it. They said they'd find the body and tell the police I killed him.
Fisher. And you did tell them about Fisher. When you told them I did. Good. Foolproof and beautiful. And Whit can really hate, can't he? You said it once, he can remember.
I never stopped hating him, Jeff. I couldn't help myself. I was caught, too. We don't have to be against each other now.
Are we?
No, we can break out of it. All we need is the briefcase. Then we've got them, Jeff. We can get anything we want from them.
I'd like that affidavit you signed.
We can get it. It's in Eels' office safe. We can make Mita get it. We can make them do anything.
Sure.
Jeff, you ought to have killed me for what I did a moment ago.
There's time.
No, you won't. I've never stopped loving you. I was afraid of no good, but I never stopped. Even if you hated me. Did you?
Yeah.
But you don't now.
No.
We can be together again. In a way we never were. We can go back to Acapulco, start all over as though nothing had happened.
You have to remember that, well, what do you think? You have to remember that scene, that tiny little movement of a shoulder. is all we get. You have to remember it because we're going to see it again. Jeff does recover the documents and proposes a deal, a once-and-for-all escape deal to Whit, who accepts. Jeff returns briefly to Bridgeport to say goodbye to Anne. In the meantime, the ruthless Kathy, after that declaration of love to Jeff, sends Joe to kill Jeff, a plan that is foiled quite improbably by the kid, who hooks Joe's arm with a fishing line and pulls him off a cliff too. I know, it's not the best moment in the film. Jeff returns to Tahoe to find that Kathy has also killed Whit, and that she has undergone a remarkable, even flabbergasting, visual transformation, returning us to the theme of what one sees and how dependent it is on what one has heard, knows, or feels. After we have just seen her in that last scene at her most glamorous, dazzlingly beautiful, and alluring, she has become in this next scene almost completely desexualized. She's desexualized herself, as if to emphasize how she now holds all the real power, is running the real show, a hyper agent, and has no need to depend on sexual allure, on the passive power of the beloved, and is glad of it.
Can't make deals with a dead man, Joe.
No, you can't.
She looks like a nun.
Let's get out of here.
There's no place left to go.
I think so.
You're running the show now?
Do you mind, Jeff?
Well, we'll see the rest of that scene a little bit later. Apparently, after seeing Whit dead, and with Kathy as close to honesty as is possible for her, Jeff decides to, and here interpretations vary, Jeff decides to pretend to go along with her back to Mexico. And on the phone, while Kathy is upstairs, Jeff apparently calls the police and turns them both in, alerts them to exactly where they'll be driving and right now. So there's a roadblock waiting for them. Interestingly, he must have done this anonymously. Otherwise, it would have been a prominent feature in later discussions at Bridgeport, where it's still unclear, as we'll see at the end, what Jeff's motives were in being with Kathy in the car. Kathy realizes what Jeff has done when she sees the roadblock, that he's turned them in. That's her belief. And this gruesome scene results. I suppose a polite way to say it is that Kathy shoots Jeff in the groin area. But it is as emasculating a shot as one can imagine. Genre characterizations can also border on formula films, and noirs have a justly earned reputation for misogyny. But there are several ending scenes like this one, which confirm some of that suspicion. The revenge on the femme fatale scenes, that I call them. And again, to perhaps try your patience with going a little longer than usual in a talk like this. I can't resist showing you a montage of revenge on the femme fatale scenes, which are also scenes of her having revenge on her main tormentor. I think you'll be surprised with the current discussion of violence in cinema, what cinema was like in the 1940s. In other words, if you're a little squeamish, you might want to look away at some of these scenes. I'll give you a warning. This first one is from a Humphrey Bogart noir called Dead Reckoning. Elizabeth Scott is the actress. And it's very similar to what you just saw. This is 1957. I remembered your angel face.
Which one do you drink?
Might as well begin sometime.
Watch it!
Slightly over the top. Well, as you remember from just seeing about this too long, the movie ends with, after Jeff has been killed, the scene with Anne and Jim, the game warden. And Anne can't go away with him. She needs to know what happened with Jeff, what really happened, what was happening, why was he in the car with her. So she asks the deaf mute, who is the, like somebody out of a Greek tragedy, like Tiresias or something, the deaf and dumb sage who knows all. We're supposed to believe that he was involved in the plan, if you were following the plot. They've been in touch constantly. So it's quite credible that he knows what's happening. But it's also just quite credible that he knows what would happen with Jeff. And we see this scene, which ends the movie on a note of complete deception. We see that if Anne were to believe that he was not running away with her, her life would be shattered by the past. She would never get out of the past. Her love affair with Jeff would have been something that could not be completed, but if he betrayed her, she could be free of the past. But the implication is the only way you can be free of the past is with a lie. A beneficent lie, the one the kid tells, but it's a fine ending. There. I mean, the contempt with which the movie treats this small town is also a little bit over the top. Her parents are odious people, full of prejudice and blindness. And the town is a town only because, as Jim begins to explain, people can avoid each other. They don't need to live with each other.
Too many people, too much talk. Maybe that's why I like this town. Here, free people are really a crowd. Let's get in the car, get away from them. I won't talk to you, Ann. I just want to be with you.
Thanks, Jim. You can tell me. You know him better than I did. Was he going away with her? I have to know. Was he going away with her?
So I'll just summarize the last part of this. The last part is just a sort of summation of the difficulty of holding to the conventional model, which I think when I first described it, we all commonsensically believe in, that most of the various decisions we made that brought us here to this evening are the result of some deliberation, a series of choices, the formation of an intention, and their execution, and you're actually walking in the door. But the movie raises, as do a lot of film noirs, a number of difficulties about this deliberative, reflective model. For one thing, the events in the film often happen at such speed, and they come at the characters with such speed. Jeff discovering Kathy back at Rick's mansion all of a sudden. Her shooting is part unexpectedly all of a sudden. That the idea of what he's supposed to do in the light of that doesn't have any space for reflective deliberation. And that the whole model we have presupposes we have some kind of reflective insight into what we want, such that when we're assessing what we ought to do, we make use of this insight into what we really want. But because of these situations of obsessive and near neurotic love, nothing about why we're involved in such relationships is anything like clear to us. And finally, decisions that we make have to rely on our ability to understand the intentions and meanings of others. And in this film, that kind of opacity, blankness, impossibility of assessing, also makes it, of others' intentions, makes it extremely difficult for us to rely on any reflective assessment of what they're thinking about what's going to happen in our deciding what's going to happen. I have a colleague in Chicago who argues that our normal models of reflective, deliberative action have to be supplemented by a completely different model he calls a creative model. That we often do things in a way on the fly, improvising, not quite sure what we're doing, but hoping we'll be able to figure it out later, after it's all over and we can make some sense of it. And that notion of belatedness, of figuring things out later, is very typical of this movie. It's only, in a way, after all of these events are over that it becomes possible to try to assess the many questions we've raised. In the last scene where they kiss on the balcony in which, imagine they kiss one more time. And there's really quite a complicated question about Jeff's own mindedness in whether he's already planning to escape, already planning to turn them in, definitely falling back into the clutches of Kathy, finally able to resist it. And the thing that's most interesting about the movie is not only do we have a great deal of trouble figuring that out, he has a great deal of trouble figuring that out. And nevertheless, has to act. We don't like to think this way about ourselves, that some of our actions, in a way, move on without us having really been at the controls. But it's typical of this movie and many film noirs. I'll show you one more brief few-second scene, because in the scene after the shootout, when Jeff is killed, I think there's quite a deliberate attempt to have him die in a way that emphasizes the passivity, the objectness, the lack of agency involved in his relationship with Kathy all the way through. It's this scene, and then I'll quit. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Robert. Really appreciate it. Great talk. Do we have time for just maybe one or two questions? Perhaps more. I can imagine it's late. It's been a long night with the screening beforehand, but maybe I'll ask you to come up and then I'll run the mic around, but this way we can capture questions.
Thank you, Professor Pippin. I was wondering if you could address the roles of the many European writers and directors who came to the United States, and many of whom were responsible for these films noir. Do you think that their attitudes in seeking freedom from the Nazis here in the U.S. may have been somewhat limited by the hustle and the bustle and the many choices that they had to make, and is that perhaps reflected in these films noir?
Yeah, that's an extremely interesting question, but actually my intuition goes the other way. In other words, I think these directors, Fritz Lang, Otto Preminger, William Dieterle, Robert Siert, Max Jacques, or just the list of noir directors who are European, especially Central European, is quite impressive, so it's quite an appropriate question. But I think my own sense, so there's really no evidence about this, and I know no work on it, that actually establishes Billy Wilder, that establishes anything definitive. All of these individual Hollywood directors, when they moved to Hollywood, escaped under situations of great stress. And they all knew people, close friends, family members, who didn't escape and who were killed. And they all appreciated that the reason they escaped and they didn't was not virtue. It was luck. Stupid, blind chance. And I have the sense sometimes that they're actually trying to teach Hollywood and the famous Hollywood endings a lesson. Life is not like that. More often than not, no matter how brave and heroic the Western hero is, what determines what happens is out of his control. A level of fatalism that reaches at some points to a kind of cynicism about the capacity for human beings to affect the future. Yes, we won the war, but the greatest civilization in Europe, the product of hundreds of years of high civilization, collapsed into a kind of barbarism that was unthinkable before it happened. So let's not take too much pride in our ability to direct the future, given that we won. Once we realized that why we had to go over there and win was something that, in a way, is inexplicable, is not something that we can attach to motive explanation or action explanation in the standard sense. So I think there was a kind of moment of realism being injected into Hollywood films about the arc of various plots and the success based on the actions of an individual heroic character. I think they were working against that, but in a way, that's just an intuition. They didn't get together and talk to themselves about why we have to teach Hollywood a lesson.
Thank you very much.
Hi, so my question, I guess, is kind of a general question about what you think film noir is responding to. And so you yourself brought up Greek tragedy. Obviously, Oedipus is a very simple example of fate being beyond the hands of an individual. Another more interesting example for my question would be like the Bacchae by Euripides, where Pentheus is kind of like the plaything, if you will, of Dionysus. And he's just subject to Dionysus's, I don't know, hubris or something like that, and this unfolding and ending up killing him or whatever. So to me, it's almost as if Greek tragedy has this, addressing this issue of agency because it's trying to deal with this change of morality, if you will, from a Homeric morality to more of like a Athenian or something like that morality, and there's this shift, and there's obviously an issue, and there's a great shift in society, and so maybe Greek tragedy is responding to this shift. And then film noir would probably be, as you kind of alluded to, responding to a similar shift in the way I see it as a change in moral reasoning or whatever for the society. And specifically, you brought up Max Weber. That led me to start thinking something along the lines of the city mentality, and you've also brought up the contrast between the city and the country. The question is, for me, is film noir, especially this piece in particular, responding to some sort of moral weakening that comes with being in a city, not having those posts that you have in like the religious or rural.
Right. Well, those are two good questions. First one's very difficult because it involves so much. I mean, the difference between the film noir sensibility and Greek tragedy in general, at least in Aeschylus and Sophocles, is that those responsible, non-human agencies, responsible for what happens, at least potentially make a certain kind of sense. The gods have their motives. There's a way of figuring out why the gods intervene the way they do. They're offended, they're angry, they're partisan. So even though we don't control things, and it's hubristic to think we do, and we get swatted down if we think it, nevertheless, the whole of what happens makes a certain kind of divine sense. By Euripides, that fence doesn't make that much sense at all in Euripides. So you do have a sensibility much closer to noir, in which destiny is much closer to chance. Another thing I would say is that you don't have to go all the way back to Greek tragedy to find these analogs. You could make a good case that the first film noir is Macbeth. You got a guy being told by the witches what he's going to do, no matter what he thinks he's going to do. You certainly have a femme fatale in Lady Macbeth. You have a guy entrapped in the actions that he can't then undo. The implications of the actions outrun his own agency. Maybe he does something intentionally, but everything that happens afterwards traps him in the implications of what he's done. And the whole tonality of the play is dark in the way that film noir is. urbanism is a very long and interesting question because it's certainly true, two things are certainly true, that the presentation of women, so there's this large issue that femme fatales are the most written about topic in film noir, especially since the 70s, since feminine, quite understand. Why portray these women that way, like Barbara Stanwyck, all the things you saw in some of the clips. And there are two sides to it. On the one hand, the women are manipulative, devious, and make use of their sexual attractiveness to gain a kind of agency they would have no other way. So they look like they're evil, but kind of slightly understandably evil. But on the other hand, it's the only role of activity or agency that's left to them, and very often we feel sympathetic to them. There are several noirs in which the attempt by the woman to kill the husband is kind of reasonable, given the odiousness of the husband. But one of the things that's often said, at least one can at least begin a conversation, is that the experience of hundreds and hundreds of thousands of men returning from the European and Japanese theaters to America with masses of women in the workforce to replace them and then displacing them again created an enormous fear about women who had been empowered in a way as wage earners. For the first time in human history, the gender-based division of labor looked to be dissolving. And that created this enormous anxiety, portrayed in an anxiety about women, and that's mostly an urban phenomenon. America after World War II was still mostly an agricultural country, but the growth of urbanism suggested that these new women, the working women, the women who were not dependent on domestic marriage for their livelihood, were threatened. That's often said about Noir, and there's certainly a grain of truth to it.
Well, we have one more question. I think we could only take one more, tops. You want to cruise down here? And let's try to keep it short, just because we want to finish up here in a few minutes.
First of all, thank you for that wonderful presentation. It was such a pleasure and an honor to hear you. So to sort of piggyback off of that, I wanted to ask you what you thought of sort of the decay in the femme fatale with post-70s film noir, Chinatown, Taxi Driver, French Connection, Blood Symbol. What cultural shifts do you think happened in which the trope of the femme fatale started to fall out of favor?
No, that's interesting. I mean, is that, so my first reaction is, what you say sounds plausible. Is that true? So I'm trying to think of movies with, one thinks right away of television, where so much more interesting things are happening in the last 10 years than in cinema. Are there femme fatales in contemporary neo-noir? You may be right.
Do you think there is a reason that they sort of started falling out of favor? It seems like we have a shift towards, focusing on the decay of the urban city, much more like fear of government, big corporations.
Yeah, that could be right. That could be right. I mean, certainly Kathleen Turner is a femme fatale. So it's, the record is spotty, but nevertheless, I mean, there's still that genre convention, but you certainly have a point that something is changing, especially in a movie like Chinatown, where Faye Dunaway is mysterious but powerless. And it's interesting that the source of her powerlessness is an abusive father. So you could say, just off the top of my head, one thing that's different is the extent of the realization that the damage done by male patriarchy is much more extensive and self-conscious. As if there isn't a chance for much of an escape from the consequences of this patriarchy. But your question reminds me also of one interesting story about Chinatown, which I'll close with. So I think that's a very good question. That's about all I know how to say about it. But Chinatown, I mean, most of you have probably seen Chinatown. It's the greatest contemporary neo-noir. And you remember the ending, which is very, very dark. They're trying to save the granddaughter of this incestuous relationship with Faye Dunaway from Noah Cross, played by John Huston. They try, and they fail. Faye Dunaway is killed, and the daughter is taken by the most evil character in contemporary film, Noah Cross. They lose. And that's what prompts the line, forget it, Jake, it's just Chinatown. Nothing we can do about it. The way of the world. That's not Robert Towne won an Oscar for that screenplay. That's not the way his screenplay ended. It's a wonderful story about chance, the theme of film noir. The screenplay ended with them winning. They succeed in wresting her away from Noah Cross, and he's arrested. It's a Hollywood movie. On the set, that night, while they were setting up to shoot that scene, Polanski said, no, let's change it. On the spur of the moment, and had Noah Cross get the child and Faye Dunaway shot. Instantaneous decision, complete chance. And that meant that the line, forget it, Jake, it's just Chinatown, backshadows everything we have seen. You have to imagine the entire movie, everything we have seen changes once it turned out that they couldn't win. That it's just Chinatown means the Noah Crosses of the world, the bosses, the people who stole the water, the people who ruined Los Angeles, who ended the streetcars, who built the freeways. Those people, they'll always win. And that was done like that, at the spur of the moment in the filming of the movie. It's just a perfect, it's as if somebody made a movie about a movie. And that's the way the filming of the movie noir should end, with a split decision by Polanski that nevertheless backshadows meaning. All the meaning and all the intentional actions that had occurred before that change, once it turns out that there's no way to get the daughter back. That is just Chinatown. Thanks very much. I'm sorry I kept you.